It's estimated 1 million camels are roaming across Australian deserts, causing environmental havoc.
Back in the 19th century, Australia imported camels to conquer the unforgiving Outback. These desert beasts, led by skilled handlers, seemed like the perfect solution for a harsh land. They carried supplies and opened new frontiers. But when their job was done, many were set free. That decision sparked a crisis no one saw coming. What started as hope turned into chaos. How did camels become Australia's nightmare? The answer is darker than you think.
Bushfires across the country have caused many camels to run into areas where they don't belong, causing people to actually kill them.
The Camel Boom. In the 1800s, Australia brought camels to conquer the Outback. They thought they were solving a transportation problem. Instead, they created a monstrosity that quickly got out of hand. The Australian Outback is a land of extremes, scorching sun, endless deserts, and barely any water. British settlers struggled to explore and build in these remote areas. Horses couldn't survive the heat, and wagons would sink in soft sand. The center of Australia, filled with vast deserts like the Great Victoria and Simpson, seemed impossible to conquer. So, the settlers turned to an unexpected solution: camels. In 1840, the first ship carrying camels arrived in South Australia. These camels, known as dromedaries, came from places like India, Afghanistan, and the Middle East, regions with similar harsh environments. Alongside them came their skilled handlers, called Afghan Camelers, although many of them were from the subcontinent, Turkey, or nearby areas. These men were experts in navigating dry, difficult landscapes. At first, it was a success. Camels could carry heavy loads over long distances with little food or water. Unlike horses or oxen, they didn't collapse in the heat. They helped transport supplies, build telegraph lines, and open trade routes to gold fields and far-off towns. Thanks to camels, the Outback started to feel a little less unreachable. The Camelers also played a huge role, though they often faced unfair treatment due to their background. Still, their contribution was so important that Australia's famous train, the Ghan, is named after them. Between 1840 and 1907, around 10,000 to 20,000 camels were brought to Australia. These animals could walk up to 45 miles a day and carry hundreds of pounds. They were strong, patient, and well-suited to desert life. They had special adaptations, like humps that stored fat and oval-shaped blood cells that kept them hydrated longer. Their thick feet and ability to eat most desert plants made them perfect for the Outback. But everything changed in the early 1900s. As trucks and trains became more common, camels were no longer needed. Instead of finding new uses for them, many owners simply let them go, thinking the desert would be too harsh for them to survive. They were wrong. Without any natural predators, the camels thrived. They spread quickly, eating native plants and damaging fragile ecosystems. What began as a smart idea turned into a long-term environmental issue. By the 20th century, Australia had a growing population of wild camels and no easy way to manage them. Nature bites back. By the early 1900s, Australia's camel experiment had taken a sharp turn. What started as a helpful solution to a harsh land was now becoming a serious problem. The camels that once carried supplies and built connections across the Outback were now wild, free-roaming animals, and there were a lot of them. These feral camels spread across an enormous area, over 1 million square miles. Deserts like the Simpson and Great Victoria became their playground. With no predators and plenty of space, their population exploded. By 2008, it was estimated that about 1 million camels were living in the wild, and their numbers were doubling every 10 years. But it wasn't just about how many there were. It was about the damage they caused. Camels eat a lot. They feed on more than 80% of the plant species they come across, which quickly strips the land of native vegetation. This created big problems, especially for Aboriginal communities who rely on those plants for traditional foods. On top of that, the loss of vegetation led to erosion. Sand dunes started collapsing because nothing was holding them together. Things got worse during droughts. Camels can smell water from 2 miles away, and when they're thirsty, they'll stop at nothing to get to it. They invaded water holes, often fighting over them. In the chaos, some would die and pollute the water, making it unsafe for other animals and people. They also broke fences, damaged water tanks and pumps, and even tore air conditioners off buildings trying to find moisture. These actions caused millions in damage to remote communities. The cultural damage was just as serious. Many Aboriginal sacred sites are connected to water sources. As camels stormed through these areas, they trampled over places of deep spiritual meaning, upsetting indigenous groups across the country. By the 2000s, camels weren't just an environmental issue. They were a social and economic one, too. They competed with cattle for food and water, became dangerous on roads and runways, and were even aggressive toward people during mating season. A once smart idea had turned into a massive challenge. The Outback, once tough for humans alone, had become a battlefield where people now had to defend their homes, land, and culture from an animal they had invited in. So the big question was, how do you fight back against a problem you created? The Outback Crisis. Between 2000 and 2010, Australia faced one of its worst dry spells in history, the Millennium Drought. As water vanished across the Outback, the feral camel problem reached a boiling point. These animals, already numbering in the hundreds of thousands, grew desperate. And desperate camels are no joke. In 2009, the small Aboriginal town of Docker River, located about 300 miles southwest of Alice Springs, found itself at the center of chaos. Around 6,000 wild camels stormed into the community, smashing through fences, knocking over water tanks, and even trying to get inside homes. They were searching for one thing: water. And Docker River wasn't alone. Across the Anangu, Pitjantjatjara, Yankunytjatjara lands in South Australia, camels roamed through streets, broke infrastructure, and fouled up water sources. Dead camels were found near dried-up water holes, and the smell of their decaying bodies created health risks. In some places, airstrips were blocked by camel herds, making it impossible for emergency supply planes to land. The images and videos that emerged from these areas were shocking. Herds of massive camels walking through neighborhoods looked like scenes from a movie, and people all over the country took notice. Public fear grew, and so did government concern. The Northern Territory government, with support from the Department of Agriculture and Environment, stepped in. It wasn't just about property damage or scary news clips. Camels were becoming a serious threat to Australia's environment and indigenous communities. They were eating rare plants, damaging fragile ecosystems, and pushing out native animals. They were also endangering sacred Aboriginal lands, many of which were centered around water sources. By this point, it was clear that basic fixes, like building fences or capturing small numbers of camels, just weren't enough. With an estimated 600,000 to 1 million camels roaming freely, Australia faced a choice: take serious action or let the problem get worse. So, in 2010, the government began planning a major response. It would go on to become one of the most talked about and controversial wildlife control efforts in Australian history. $19 million camel culling campaign. By 2009, Australia's camel crisis had become too big to ignore. With camels invading towns, destroying water sources, and damaging sacred Aboriginal sites, the government decided it was time to take serious action. That's when they launched the Australian Feral Camel Management Project, a major operation with a huge price tag, $19 million. The goal? Reduce the exploding camel population before it caused even more damage. The program ran from 2009 to 2013 and was managed by a group called nineteenth Limited. It focused on hard-to-reach areas like the Simpson Desert and the Great Victoria Desert, where the camels had spread far and wide. Since these places were so remote, rounding up the camels wasn't realistic. So, the government turned to aerial culling. This meant using helicopters, with trained shooters on board, to locate and kill camels from the air. By the time the program ended in 2013, around 160,000 camels had been culled. That brought the total feral camel population down to about 300,000. The culling took place across a massive area, about 500,000 square miles, and only happened with the approval of Aboriginal landowners. The government insisted that the operation followed animal welfare rules and was carried out as humanely as possible. Still, not everyone agreed. The project sparked outrage from animal rights groups around the world. Organizations like Animals Australia spoke out against the aerial shootings, arguing that it was cruel and led to suffering, especially if camels were only wounded and not killed instantly. Even within Australia, opinions were mixed. Some Indigenous communities supported the cull, especially those who had seen sacred water sources ruined by large herds. But others felt it was wrong to let so many animals die without being used for something. They were upset that the camel carcasses were often left to rot in the desert. Some people suggested alternatives, like using birth control drugs or gathering camels to sell their meat or export them. But these ideas were quickly rejected. The land was just too big, and there weren't enough facilities nearby to process the animals. What we learned. The Australian Feral Camel Management Project did manage to bring the camel numbers down for a while. By the time the program ended in 2013, about 160,000 camels had been culled, and the population was estimated to be around 300,000. But the problem didn't disappear. These camels breed fast, growing at nearly 10% every year, so the numbers didn't stay low for long. Some experts now believe there could be anywhere from 1 to 1.2 million camels roaming the outback once again. The culling proved one thing: aerial shooting works in remote areas, but it's not a long-term solution. It's expensive, controversial, and doesn't stop the population from bouncing back. The camels still thrive in places like the Simpson, Great Victoria, Great Sandy, and Tanami deserts, areas that are vast, dry, and nearly impossible to monitor fully. While the big culling campaigns are no longer as common, the problem remains. These days, attention has turned to non-lethal ways to control the population. Some Indigenous groups, such as the Nganyatjara Council, have looked into turning the problem into an opportunity. They've explored using camels for business, especially for meat and milk. By 2019, camel milk production reached 180,000 liters a year, and meat from camels was being processed in abattoirs in Queensland and South Australia. The meat is now exported to places like Europe, the US, Japan, and the Middle East. But growing these industries to a point where they could control the camel population isn't easy. Camels are massive animals, Some weigh over 1,000 pounds and live in extremely remote areas. Just transporting them to a facility can cost more than it's worth. It's a tough job with lots of challenges. Other approaches, like fencing off water holes to keep camels out, have shown some success. These exclusion fences help protect vital water sources for people, livestock, and native wildlife. But building and maintaining these fences is expensive, and they only work in small areas. Technology is also playing a role. A tracking tool called Camel Scan is helping people report sightings and monitor camel movements across the country. It's useful for planning control efforts, but camels move fast and cover huge distances, so even that has limits. A desperate decision. The problem doesn't end there. While the world watched Australia burn during the brutal bushfires of 2020, another crisis was unfolding quietly in the remote Anangu Pit Jant Jatjara, Yankunit Jatjara lands of South Australia. The country wasn't just fighting flames or suffering from drought, it was also facing an invasion of thousands of feral camels. An estimated 10,000 of them had started moving in large numbers, desperately searching for water in a land that was already stretched thin. These camels weren't just a minor inconvenience. They trampled native plants, ruined water holes, pushed out endangered animals like the bilby, and destroyed the bush tucker that local Aboriginal communities depended on. This wasn't something happening in cities or small towns. It was taking place in the vast and quiet outback, far from media attention, but no less dangerous. The camels were growing more aggressive as water became harder to find. They began to crowd near homes, break fences, and scare off local wildlife. With the land already damaged by fire and drought, something had to be done quickly. The South Australian government made a controversial decision: a 5-day emergency camel cull. Helicopters were sent in, flying over the remote desert regions with professional shooters. By the end of the operation, around 4,000 to 5,000 camels had been killed. Their bodies were left where they fell, too many, and in areas too hard to reach. For those involved, it was a painful but necessary task. But not everyone agreed. Animal rights groups like PETA criticized the cull heavily, calling it cruel and wasteful. They suggested other solutions, like relocating the camels or using them for meat and milk. Why kill them, they asked, when better uses could have been found? However, many locals saw it differently. To them, the cull wasn't about being cruel. It was about survival. With fires destroying the landscape and water sources disappearing fast, there simply wasn't time or money to organize large-scale relocations. They believed the camels, if left unchecked, would have destroyed what little remained of their fragile environment and sacred land. The Great Australian Camel Race. Not all camel stories in Australia are about trouble or destruction. In fact, one of the most unforgettable chapters in camel history was all about celebration, adventure, and national pride. It happened in 1988, the year Australia celebrated its bicentenary, 200 years since the arrival of the First Fleet. While people across the country were throwing parties, building monuments, and holding parades, one man had a very different idea. Arthur Earl, a wealthy businessman with a love for the outback, came up with something bold. Why not organize a massive camel race through the heart of Australia? And not just a short sprint, he wanted the longest, toughest camel endurance race the country had ever seen. The plan was ambitious. The race would stretch over 2,000 miles, starting from Ayers Rock in Central Australia and ending at the Gold Coast, near the site of World Expo 88. Riders would have to face deserts, rocky landscapes, and all sorts of wild weather. It wasn't going to be easy, but that was the point. The race had three main goals. First, it was a way to show off the tough and beautiful Australian outback. Second, it aimed to raise money for the Royal Flying Doctor Service, which helps people in remote areas get emergency medical care. And third, it honored the Afghan Camelers, who played a huge role in exploring and developing Australia's interior during the 1800s. The event drew attention from all over the world. With a total prize pool of $100,000 and $45,000 set aside for the winner, it was no small race. Riders weren't just in it for the money, though. Many came for the challenge, the adventure, and the unique connection they formed with their camels along the way. These camels weren't just animals. They were partners in one of the most physically and mentally demanding events ever held in the country. Slowly but surely, day after day, camels and riders crossed some of the harshest land on Earth. Afghan Camelers and Aboriginal connections. When Afghan Camelers began exploring the vast, dry heart of Australia in the 1800s, they didn't just bring camels, they brought change. These men, often from Afghanistan, India, and nearby regions, were experts at surviving in harsh desert conditions. But as they journeyed deeper into the Australian outback, they met people who had already lived in these lands for tens of thousands of years. Aboriginal communities. What happened next wasn't just a quick meeting. It was a rich exchange of goods, culture, and survival skills. The Camelers brought with them camels loaded with supplies that many Aboriginal people had never seen before. Items like tea, sugar, tobacco, clothes, and metal tools became part of this trade. These goods were not only useful, but sometimes even life-changing. But the trade didn't just go one way. Aboriginal people, with deep knowledge of the land, shared their understanding of desert survival. They knew where to find hidden water holes, how to identify safe plants, and which paths to follow. This knowledge was vital to the Camelers, who often relied on Aboriginal guides to navigate the unforgiving terrain. Together, they also carried out traditional trade. The Camelers helped move important Aboriginal goods, like red ochre and pituri, a native plant with stimulant properties, across ancient trade routes such as the Birdsville Track. Over time, the connection between camels and Aboriginal people only grew. Camel hair started showing up in string-based artifacts, and Aboriginal men and women were hired to assist on long desert trips. These partnerships sometimes turned into real friendships and even led to marriages. A unique example of this relationship came between 1928 and 1933, when a missionary named Ernest Kramer used camels for his trips through Central Australia. His goal was to spread Christianity, but he didn't travel alone. He was joined by Aboriginal guides like Mickey Dow Dow, an Arrernte man who not only handled camels but also worked as a translator and cultural guide. Another man named Barney sometimes traveled with them too. Together, they handed out small gifts, things like boiled sweets, tea, and sugar. They used a gramophone to play songs such as Jesus Loves Me, and at night, they showed the story of Christmas with a magic lantern, an old-fashioned projector with glass slides. For many Aboriginal people, this was their first glimpse of Christian traditions. What would you do? So here's the big question. What would you do if your country was suddenly home to over 1 million wild camels? Australia tried to use camels to conquer the desert, and it backfired. From early Camelier success stories to the dramatic helicopter culls, it's been a roller coaster. The Australian government reduced the numbers, but there are still more than 1 million camels roaming the wild. Some people hope meat and milk businesses could help, but it's a massive job. The lesson? Once you bring a species in, you're stuck with the consequences. The camels are still out there. What would be your plan? Let us know in the comments below.